internet. Thanks to new technology, we have a future no longer bound by two axes. Looking into this headset can show us the third dimension. You know what, maybe 2D isn't that bad. So Nintendo was doing fairly well back in the 90s. The Super Nintendo was fighting against the Sega Genesis, while the Game Boy was following in the footsteps of the NES by having no legitimate competition. However, that wouldn't last for long. 3D was rapidly approaching as the new norm for consoles, with 1994 bringing in new systems from Nintendo's biggest competitor and previous partner. Now, what did they have to show this year? Well, we have Wario's Woods. You see, Nintendo was working on their own 3D system at the time, but that was taking a little more time in the oven. But they needed to ship something, so why not try to push out a little appetizer for the consumers? Because it tastes terrible. Now, Nintendo wasn't quite ready for full 3D, but they could do something similar with stereoscopic 3D, which was less like polygons and more like separate layers that you can definitely tell are separate. The late Gunpei Yokoi saw a lot of potential with this tech, although to incorporate it into a commercial product there had to be changes, mostly to reduce costs and make sure it was safe for consumers to use. Why do I have a bad feeling about this? This new system was revealed as the VR32, with a red and black screen to reduce costs, and no head strap to make sure people didn't play it for too long, because would you trust this thing with your eyes for more than 15 to 30 minutes? As you might have expected, the Virtual Boy didn't exactly light the world on fire. It did do that to a few pairs of eyes though. This was one of Nintendo's worst selling consoles of all time, and lives on in infamy. But what was it actually like to play? Due to the low sales, not many people have gotten their hands on this thing and experienced it, so what better time to show it off than now? Let's hope I don't regret this. Starting off, we have the console itself. Unlike your standard VR headset, this one has flimsy little appendages to hold itself up. Sure, it feels a little unstable and more like a quick novelty with this setup, but at least it stands out. The controller is actually surprisingly ahead of its time. You have shoulder buttons, 2 D-pads, and even a power button on the controller. Although it can be hard to tell which face buttons are which when your face is in this thing. Apparently it's classified as a portable console, but are you really going to take this thing on the road? I'd consider it more of a tabletop console, something more akin to the Vectrex or a Switch that you set on a flat surface. Now I could talk about this piece of plastic all day, but the real strength of a console is its games, and the Virtual Boy definitely had them. The game that came with the system was Mario's Tennis. Apparently the following ones don't belong to him, but this one does. It might seem weird to have a tennis game as your system seller, although it's more common than you'd think. When you look at 2D tennis games outside of something like Pong, it's actually a bit difficult to pinpoint where the ball is, and the 3D effect offered by the Virtual Boy does help. This was made before Mario sports games really hit their stride on the Nintendo 64, so for its time this was a pretty good tennis game, little much more than that. In comparison to this, which is definitely a lesser tennis game. Galactic Pinball went through a few different titles before apparently settling on the best one. It actually works fairly well for a system like the Virtual Boy, since it takes place on a static screen and you can see more of the table. All you have to worry about is keeping up the ball and scoring points, but the pinball tables themselves have a lot going on. Heck, even Samus's gunship appears, making Metroid Prime Pinball make more sense. While this makes absolutely zero sense. Now, Star Fox was a major title in terms of showing off what the Super Nintendo could do, so they made Red Alarm to similarly show off what the Virtual Boy couldn't do. Alright, I don't hate vector-based games. I think they can work fairly well even in 3D, but with only one color, it's impossible to tell where you're even going, much less hit any of the targets. The display helps a little, but barely. Tellero Boxer works much better on the system. It's similar to another Nintendo game, being Punch-Out, but it manages to have its own sense of style and presentation, with the Boxers being robots. The game takes full advantage of the controller's 2 D-pads to allow for plenty of different maneuvers, and there are plenty of freaky little robots to beat the absolute heck out of. The Virtual Boy actually has quite a few sports games in its library, including... Virtual League Baseball's history is probably more interesting than the game itself. It started out with more cartoony box art and sprites, but was changed in localization to appeal to more mature audiences. Yeah, because you look real cool playing this thing. Mario Clash is more of what you'd expect on the Virtual Boy. It takes a similar route as Donkey Kong on the Game Boy, and updates the original Mario Bros. Arcade game with some new gameplay. What it lacks in gameplay depth in comparison to Game Boy Donkey Kong, it makes up for in physical depth. And the more high score based approach once again fits really well for the system it's on. Now does this game fit? Huh, I guess it does. The Shin Megami Tensei series remained exclusive to Japan for much of its early life, but the first game to come overseas was Jack Brothers. It's much more action-focused to appeal to the West, but they still released it on the Virtual Boy. In all seriousness, this is another really fun game to play. The controls are tight and defeating enemies is insanely satisfying, even if the time limits are a bit on the strict side. There was also a golf game, not much else to say about that. Oh, thank God for Wario. You know, most people would assume Wario Land 2 was the follow-up to the original Wario Land, but it received one on the Virtual Boy 3 years prior. A bit like how Sonic CD followed up the original Sonic 1. Even if it's harder on the eyes than other games in the series, Virtual Boy Wario Land is still enjoyable to control, and the underground setting kinda works with the color palette. Similar to Jack Brothers, Panic Bomber was the first game in its series to reach the West. It's super satisfying and the character designs are cool, although it doesn't use the Virtual Boy hardware much. Vertical Force does use the 3D capabilities of the Virtual Boy and suffers for it. It's hard to tell which plane the enemies and power-ups are on, which leads to just a heap of garbage. Hey, exactly like this thing. Waterworld, the only licensed game for the Virtual Boy based on a notorious box office flop. These things are made for each other. The game itself, I mean, it's not tennis, but it's fine. Nestor's Funky Bowling is fairly interesting. It stars Nestor from the Nintendo Power comics, whose name derives from the NES acronym. Strangely enough, he has a sister named Hester who only appears in this game. So where does her name come from? And finally, we have 3D Tetris. I mean, it's what it says in the box, can't really complain. Now, there were a few other games that didn't leave Japan, but I don't think my eyes can take much more Virtual Boy. Obvious issues aside, this was a quality library of games, and the 3D technology would go on to inspire systems like the Nintendo 3DS. Hey, if a success like this can come from Virtual Boy influence, maybe I should take after it as well. Yeah, never mind.